For a quarter of a century, MacKenzie Bezos was the unwavering partner at her husband's side. She championed his vision when he was merely another Wall Street analyst, harboring an audacious dream of selling books over the internet. She agreed without hesitation when he proposed abandoning his secure high-status career to relocate across the nation. She was the one behind the wheel driving their car from New York all the way to Seattle as he meticulously crafted the business plan. She handled the negotiations for Amazon's very first shipping agreements. She was there packing the orders. She was the one who kept the financial records straight. While he was constructing his colossal empire, she was raising their 4 children, and once that empire crowned him the wealthiest man on the planet. His reward for her devotion was a textbook betrayal of secret hotel liaisons and covert text messages. This all culminated in an 8-month-long affair with a married television personality, a woman he met ironically through her own husband. But this narrative doesn't conclude with Mackenzie's sorrow. It concludes with her monumental act of giving away $26 billion to those who were genuinely in need. It concludes with the organizations she single-handedly transformed, reverently calling her Saint Mackenzie. It concludes with her emerging from this public humiliation as the most honored, most admired, and most cherished figure involved. And it finishes with Jeff Bezos confronting a lesson that $38 billion could never buy. Integrity is worth more than wealth. True loyalty is not a commodity that can be purchased. And sometimes the very woman you discard rises to become everything you are fundamentally incapable of being. So what was the real story behind the events of January 2019, when the National Enquirer laid bare Jeff Bezos' most private messages for the entire world to read? How did Lauren Sanchez's own sibling sell her out for a sum of $200,000? And what connection does the government of Saudi Arabia have with a billionaire's private affair? And how did a woman who lost half of her fortune ultimately donate more than she ever kept for herself? Today, we unveil the complete saga, the texts, the attempted blackmail, the global conspiracy, and the divorce that sent shockwaves around the globe. And at the center of it all, a quiet, graceful woman who transformed a devastating personal betrayal into the single greatest act of charity in recent American history. This is the chronicle of Jeff Bezos' $38 billion blunder, and the woman who demonstrated that the ultimate revenge is to become a better person. To truly grasp the magnitude of what Jeff Bezos shattered, you must first comprehend what Mackenzie was instrumental in helping him create, and it all began with the sound of a laugh. The year was 1993, and Mackenzie Tuttle, then 22, and a recent Princeton University graduate, was employed as a research associate at D.E. Shaw, among the most elite hedge funds on all of Wall Street. Her purpose for being there was not to find a spouse. She was there on the strength of her own formidable intellect. Her professor back at Princeton, the Nobel laureate Toni Morrison, had described her as one of the finest students I have ever had in my creative writing classes. Mackenzie Tuttle was destined to be a novelist. That was her calling. That was her extraordinary talent. The position at the hedge fund was just a temporary measure, a practical way to cover her expenses while she focused on her writing. Jeff Bezos held a senior vice president title at that same company. His office happened to be situated directly adjacent to hers, and through those thin walls, Mackenzie consistently heard a sound that would profoundly alter the course of her life. It was his laugh. Years later, she would recount the experience to Vogue magazine. My office was right next to his, and I spent all day listening to that wonderful laugh. How could anyone possibly not fall in love with a laugh like that? She initiated their first contact, inviting him to lunch. He accepted. Just 3 months after that, they were officially engaged. 6 months following their engagement, they were married without any prenuptial agreement. And why would they have had one? The entity known as Amazon was not yet in existence. Jeff was simply a brilliant man with a promising career and an infectious laugh. Mackenzie was a budding novelist who had complete faith in him. That faith was about to face its ultimate challenge. In 1994, Jeff approached Mackenzie with a concept that nearly anyone else would have dismissed as utter madness. He intended to walk away from his lucrative 6-figure Wall Street position to sell books over the internet, operating out of their garage. Back in 1994, the internet was little more than a novelty. The majority of Americans had not yet sent an email. The concept of online shopping was non-existent. Every single financial expert, every relative, and every logical person advised Jeff Bezos that he was committing a catastrophic error. MacKenzie showed no signs of hesitation. She also resigned from her job and packed up the contents of their New York apartment, and in a move that has since become legendary within Silicon Valley, she took the driver's seat for the nearly 3,000-mile journey from New York to Seattle. All the while, Jeff was in the passenger seat hammering out the foundational business plan for Amazon. She didn't merely endorse his dream, she actively became a cornerstone of it. But this is the detail that the popular narrative often overlooks. Long before she became MacKenzie Bezos, she was Mackenzie Tuttle, a distinguished Princeton graduate and a creative writing prodigy, so skilled that Toni Morrison had called her one of the best students I've ever had. Mackenzie Tuttle's destiny was to author novels. That was her innate gift. She possessed the talent, the top-tier education, and an iconic mentor. She had all the necessary components to forge a significant literary career, but then she encountered a man with a different kind of dream, a bigger, more consuming dream that would demand every part of her, and she made a pivotal choice. Her own manuscripts were put on hold as Jeff steadily became the public face of Amazon. She was the one reconciling the company's financial statements at 2 o'clock in the morning, while his name began to feature prominently in business journals and newspaper articles. Her own name was conspicuously absent from public view. Her first novel wouldn't see the light of day until 2005, a full 11 years after she made that fateful drive to Seattle, an entire decade spent prioritizing another person's ambitions over her own. And when her moment finally arrived with her book, The Testing of Luther Albright, earning a prestigious American Book Award, the general public was largely unaware that Jeff Bezos was even married. It makes one wonder what literary masterpieces were never penned during those years. What narratives were silenced so Amazon's story could be told? That's a question we can never answer. Mackenzie, for her part, never voiced a complaint or sought any of the credit. She simply continued to labor to make concessions and to consistently place her husband's grand vision far ahead of her own aspirations. Barely a year into their marriage, Mackenzie made the inaugural sacrifice, in a long series of them, a decision that would ultimately reshape the globe. The garage where Amazon was born was located in Bellevue, Washington. A potbelly stove served as their only source of heat. Their desks were crudely assembled from old doors, and Mackenzie Bezos was a constant presence through it all. She was instrumental in renaming the company. Jeff's initial idea had been Cadabra, in the vein of abracadabra. An attorney noted its unfortunate phonetic similarity to the word cadaver. Over a phone call, Mackenzie helped him brainstorm different possibilities. They eventually decided on Amazon, named in honor of the world's most massive river, which mirrored Jeff's aspiration to construct the world's most extensive store. In those formative days, Mackenzie took on any and every task that was required. She handled negotiations for Amazon's initial freight contracts with shipping carriers and also served as the company's very first accountant. Amid the chaos of the holiday season, she was right there packing boxes next to the small team of employees they could hire personally, driving the packages to the post office. For each hour Jeff dedicated to envisioning the future of electronic commerce, Mackenzie invested an hour in the practical labor that kept the business running. For every high-stakes investor meeting he attended, she was the one back at the warehouse, meticulously balancing the financial records. For every media interview where he articulated his expansive vision, she was busy securing freight agreements with corporations that had barely heard of the internet. She wasn't the one with the grand vision. She was the individual who made that vision a tangible reality. Then there was her other full-time job, the one that is rarely highlighted in business magazines. She was raising their children. While Jeff was jetting off to meetings, delivering keynote speeches at conferences, and rising to become America's most celebrated entrepreneur, Mackenzie remained at home with their 4 kids. She managed the daily routines of bedtime, schoolwork, and medical appointments, effectively serving as both mother and father, while Jeff constructed his commercial empire. Whenever you encounter a story about a wildly successful man who poured every waking hour into building his enterprise, you should ask yourself who was bringing up his children, who was maintaining his household, who performed all the unseen labor that afforded him the freedom to be absent. In the case of Jeff Bezos, the undeniable answer was MacKenzie. The years rolled by, and Amazon expanded from selling just books to offering nearly everything. The company evolved from a humble garage startup into the most valuable corporation on the planet, and Jeff Bezos transformed from an unknown figure into the wealthiest man in modern history. By 2018, Amazon's valuation had soared past $1 trillion, and Jeff's personal wealth had surpassed an astounding $150 billion. They had been married for 25 years, and to their friends, they appeared to be the absolute picture of a perfect couple. Jeff often credited MacKenzie in public as his steadfast rock. He told interviewers he felt like he'd won the lottery, with her describing her as the complete package. He was being deceptive, because by 2018, while MacKenzie was dedicating her life to raising their children, fully invested in the life she believed they had built together, Jeff was already exchanging text messages with another woman and making arrangements for clandestine meetings. He was already crafting the very messages that would eventually be exposed for the entire globe to scrutinize. MacKenzie had no idea. It was impossible for her to have known. The marriage she so deeply believed in was for all intents and purposes already over. Her husband's choice had already been made. He just hadn't been exposed yet. The woman who would ultimately shatter MacKenzie's world was someone she knew, an acquaintance from her social circle, a person whose own husband had introduced her to Jeff. Her name was Lauren Sanchez, and by the springtime of 2018, she and Jeff Bezos were trading the kinds of messages that would ultimately be read by millions of people. This is who she was, and this is the story of how it all came undone. Lauren Sanchez was a charismatic and highly ambitious television news anchor, deeply ingrained in Hollywood's social scene, and a certified helicopter pilot who ran her own successful aerial filming business. She was also a married woman. Lauren's husband, Patrick Whitesell, was one of the most powerful talent agents in the entertainment industry, the co-CEO of WME, who represented A-listers from Ben Affleck to Oprah Winfrey. The Whitesells were the very definition of a Hollywood power couple. With 2 children together, their union appeared completely solid. But here is the single detail that makes this entire story so heartbreaking. It was Patrick Whitesell who had personally facilitated the introduction between his wife and Jeff Bezos. The 2 couples frequently socialized, were seen at the same events, and took holidays in the same exclusive destinations. A bond of trust existed. Patrick considered Jeff to be a friend. MacKenzie, in turn, considered Lauren a friend, and then sometime during the early months of 2018, while both marriages gave every appearance of being happy, while both families were raising their children, and while both wives operated under the assumption that their husbands were being faithful, Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sanchez commenced an affair. Professional helicopter journeys became secret rendezvous. Business discussions turned into romantic text exchanges. Their once casual friendship devolved into a devastating betrayal of 2 marriages simultaneously. For a period of 8 months, Jeff engaged in a profound deception against the woman who was his partner in building the Amazon empire. Over that same time, Lauren was unfaithful to the very man who had introduced her into the world of the planet's most affluent person. All the while, MacKenzie was completely unaware, dedicating her days at home to raising their 4 children. Patrick was similarly in the dark, consumed with running his agency, placing his full trust in his wife and the man he thought was his friend. But such secrets rarely remain concealed indefinitely, and this particular secret was poised to detonate in the most public manner conceivable because a person within Lauren's own circle had been paying close attention. This was a person who spotted a lucrative opportunity, an individual willing to betray his own sister for a payment of $200,000. The intimate text messages exchanged between Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sanchez would eventually serve as central evidence in one of the most unusual media scandals of the modern era. But before they were splashed across the pages of the tabloids, they were nothing more than words on a digital screen. They were private words, deeply intimate words, communications that were never meant to be seen by any other eyes. The National Enquirer would later make the extraordinary claim of having tracked Jeff and Lauren over 40,000 miles across 5 separate states while they carried on their affair. The publication had amassed photos, text messages a complete dossier. The electronic correspondence dated back to April of 2018 at the very least. The messages were explicit, intensely romantic, and utterly damning. One of the communications reportedly read, "I want to smell you. I want to breathe you in. I want to hold you tight." Another one declared, "I love you alive, girl. I will show you with my body and my lips and my eyes very soon." These were not merely flirtatious exchanges. These were clear declarations of an active physical affair between two people who were both married, one of them being Jeff Bezos, the wealthiest man in the world. A father of 4 children and a husband for 25 years, was composing digital love letters to a woman who was not his own wife. The logistics involved in their affair are truly staggering to consider. Jeff commanded a $65 million private jet. He frequently used this aircraft to fly Lauren to clandestine locations. They arranged to meet in hotels and secluded homes, anywhere they felt they could remain undiscovered. Let's just pause on this for a second because it is crucial to understand the timeline. In May of 2018, while Jeff was texting Lauren Sanchez that he longed to breathe her in, MacKenzie was at their home, raising their children, operating under the belief that her marriage was fundamentally strong. 25 years of accumulated trust were about to be shattered by a series of text messages she had no idea even existed. For 8 long months, Jeff was convinced he was exercising the utmost caution, using private jets, secret hotels, and encrypted messages, every precaution his vast fortune could provide. However, he overlooked a single critical vulnerability. Lauren had shared a number of those very texts with her own brother Michael Sanchez. He was a Hollywood talent manager who largely existed in his sister's considerable shadow, but maintained connections to some quite notable individuals. Michael examined those messages and perceived something Jeff had never wanted anyone to see: a massive payday. The National Enquirer was on the verge of securing the biggest story of the decade, and Michael Sanchez was prepared to betray his own sister for $200,000. Michael Sanchez made his living as a Hollywood talent manager, handling the careers of minor celebrities and fostering connections with figures from the world of Donald Trump. He was acquainted with Roger Stone and had even appeared publicly alongside Carter Page. Michael constantly lived in the shadow of his more renowned sister. He had access to her sphere of influence, but not a share of her success. What Michael did possess, however, was information, and he was quite prepared to sell it. The National Enquirer was known to pay generously for scandalous material on Jeff Bezos, and Michael Sanchez had an abundance of such material to offer. The final price agreed upon was $200,000. For a sum of $200,000, Michael Sanchez betrayed his own flesh and blood. He provided the Enquirer with their text conversations. He gave them photographs. He offered them specifics of secret rendezvous. He delivered everything. It was all the material they required to completely demolish 2 separate marriages. By the fall of 2018, both MacKenzie Bezos and Patrick Whitesell had uncovered the affair. They learned of the infidelity in private, far from any cameras, and they began to handle the fallout within their respective families. But the National Enquirer was never going to permit this story to remain private. They had already invested too much capital and paid too high a price, and for them, something far more precious than money was at stake. They had a golden opportunity to humiliate the man who owned the Washington Post. This was the very newspaper that had been relentlessly critical of their political associate Donald Trump. On January 9th of 2019, Jeff and MacKenzie Bezos posted a meticulously phrased joint statement on Twitter. It announced that after a long period of loving exploration and trial separation, the couple had come to the decision to divorce. They insisted they would carry on as cherished friends. The statement was dignified, respectful, and precisely the kind of announcement you would expect from mature adults ending a marriage of many years. Just a few hours later, the National Enquirer dropped its bombshell publication, an 11-page spread. It contained explicit text messages, intimate personal photographs, and secret trysts that were documented in the most excruciating detail. The tabloid did not simply report that Jeff Bezos had been unfaithful to his wife. It published the actual proof for the entire world to witness. The joint statement was exposed as a complete fabrication. There had been no loving exploration at all. There was only betrayal, and now everybody was aware of it. Lauren Sanchez was absolutely devastated. Her own brother had been the one to sell her out to the press. Her most intimate communications were traded for tabloid money by someone she had placed her trust in. Through her legal representative, Lauren issued a statement concerning Michael that he held nothing back, discreetly feeding my most intimate details directly to the National Enquirer. It was a profound and unforgivable act of treachery. The brother and sister have been estranged ever since. When Lauren Sanchez and Jeff Bezos tied the knot in Venice in June of 2025, Michael was conspicuously absent from the guest list. Their mother was also excluded. The family unit had been completely shattered. The damage wasn't caused by the infidelity itself, but by the brother who brought it into the light. However, the National Enquirer had more in store for Jeff Bezos. Their next move would escalate a typical celebrity affair into a far more sinister situation. On the 7th of February 2019, Jeff Bezos made a surprising move. Rather than retreating from the controversy, he launched a counterattack through a blog post pointedly titled, "No Thank You, Mr. Pecker." The title was a direct jab at David Pecker, the chief executive officer of AMY, the parent company of the Enquirer. In his post, Bezos disclosed that the tabloid was threatening to release even more explicit photographs if he refused to comply with their demands. The nature of the threats was very precise. AMI asserted they possessed images so humiliating and compromising that the wealthiest man on the planet would undoubtedly pay any sum to ensure they remained secret. Their conditions were just as clear-cut halt the investigation into how his private text messages were leaked. He was to publicly state that their coverage had no political motivations. The ultimatum was simple: comply, or they would publish every last thing. It was a classic case of extortion, but Jeff refused. Instead of surrendering to the extortion and blackmail, he wrote, "I have made the decision to publish the exact contents of what they sent me, regardless of the personal price and the humiliation they have threatened." True to his word, he released the authentic emails sent from AMI, laying bare their threats in granular detail and broadcasting the very information they sought to keep hidden. If someone in my position cannot stand up to this kind of extortion, then how many people can? It was impossible to overlook the significant political undercurrents of the situation. There was a well-documented connection between AMI, David Pecker, and Donald Trump. Pecker had been a steadfast ally of Trump for years, while Bezos was the owner of the Washington Post, the very publication Trump relentlessly labeled as fake news on an almost daily basis. Was this merely a sensational tabloid story, or was it a calculated act of political retribution? Jeff's security detail uncovered something even more peculiar: evidence that pointed to his phone possibly being compromised several months prior. They suspected that a message originating from the WhatsApp account of Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman could have been the very vector for the breach. This meant that the very same Saudi regime linked to the brutal murder of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi might also be the entity that acquired Jeff's private communications. The Federal Bureau of Investigation launched an inquiry, but was unable to find any conclusive evidence. To this day, the questions linger without answers. Let's be perfectly clear about what had just transpired. The wealthiest individual on earth was facing blackmail involving his own intimate pictures from a tabloid media company with known connections to the President of the United States. Furthermore, compelling evidence suggested that a foreign government might have been responsible for extracting those very photos from his personal device. This had evolved far beyond a simple celebrity scandal. This was now a matter of blackmail and potential international espionage. One of the most powerful men on the globe was being threatened with public humiliation by shadowy forces he could neither identify nor control. Yet amidst the chaos, one central fact was unshakable. Jeff Bezos had been unfaithful to his wife. Regardless of how the texts were intercepted, they were real because he was the one who had sent them. No matter what conspiracy eventually came to light, its origins traced back to his personal decision to betray MacKenzie. The blackmail may have been a crime committed by others. The affair was a choice he made entirely on his own. In the end, the blackmail attempt crumbled, and the Saudi investigation lost momentum. The news cycle quickly churned on to the next major scandal, yet none of the subsequent drama could alter the one fundamental truth. Jeff Bezos had betrayed his wife of a quarter-century. The proof was available for all to see, and their marriage was irrevocably over. This led to the single question on everybody's mind. What would the financial fallout be? The state of Washington where the couple resided operates under community property laws. This principle dictates that any wealth accumulated over the course of a marriage belongs equally to both partners. Upon divorce, those assets are typically divided right down the middle 50-50. Jeff and MacKenzie were married in 1993, just 1 year before Amazon was launched in 1994. Consequently, every last share of Amazon stock and every single dollar of profit and every asset the company produced during their 25-year union was legally considered community property, meaning all of it belonged to MacKenzie just as much as it did to Jeff. Critically, there was no prenup in place as they had married before the concept of Amazon was even born. By January of 2019, Jeff Bezos' net worth was estimated at roughly $150 billion. According to Washington state law, MacKenzie was legally entitled to half of that fortune, a staggering $75 billion, and potentially even more if she chose to contest it. But before we delve into the monetary settlement MacKenzie received, it is important to consider the price she had already paid. She devoted her entire 20s to Jeff Bezos, the very decade when most individuals are forging their own career paths, shaping their personal identities, and pursuing their own ambitions. During those formative years, MacKenzie was in a garage, physically packing boxes and meticulously managing the finances for a fledgling company that faced a very real possibility of failure. She then dedicated her 30s to him, a period during which her peers from Princeton were advancing to become professors, corporate executives, and celebrated published authors. MacKenzie invested those years in raising their children and running their household, all while her husband was catapulted to global fame. Finally, she sacrificed her 40s for him, the very years when she might have finally had the opportunity to concentrate on her own personal and professional goals. By that point, however, she had become so profoundly identified as Jeff Bezos' wife that the world had largely forgotten she was once Mackenzie Tuttle, the promising writer whom the great Toni Morrison had believed in. A full 25 years, from age 23 to 48. The entirety of her youth was poured into a partnership she trusted would last a lifetime. MacKenzie dedicated a quarter-century of her life to Jeff Bezos. In return for that devotion, he offered her 8 months of deception. Absolutely no one would have faulted MacKenzie for taking every last thing the law permitted, but she chose not to. On April 4th, 2019, as their divorce was finalized, MacKenzie published a message on Twitter. She publicly announced that she was ceding to Jeff 75% of their shared Amazon stock, as well as all of her interests in the Washington Post, and her entire stake in Blue Origin, even including the voting control over the shares she decided to keep. She would receive roughly 4% of Amazon, amounting to 19.7 million shares. At that particular time, that stake held a value somewhere between $35.6 and $38 billion. This was by a massive margin the largest divorce settlement in all of human history, yet it was still less than half of what she truly deserved. MacKenzie accepted the money and uttered nothing negative about Jeff. There were no bitter interviews, no scandalous tell-all books, and no public accusations. Her singular public statement was contained in a single tweet: "Grateful for the past as I look forward to what comes next. Grateful for the past." After a 25-year marriage, after helping to construct Amazon from scratch, after raising 4 children, and after being betrayed and utterly humiliated before the eyes of the entire world, that response is not a sign of weakness. It is a demonstration of profound strength. Most observers simply assumed that this was the end of her public story. The wronged wife collected her settlement. The unfaithful husband kept his massive company. It seemed everyone would just move on. But MacKenzie Scott was far from finished. What she did next would send shockwaves through the philanthropic world and transform thousands of organizations, and make her more renowned for giving away her fortune than her ex-husband ever was for amassing his. The betrayed wife was on the verge of becoming America's most charitable billionaire. The very first thing MacKenzie did after her divorce was change her name, officially dropping Bezos. and re-emerging as MacKenzie Scott using her middle name, which she took from her grandfather. It was a symbolic gesture, a profound reclamation of self. She was no longer going to be defined by the man who had betrayed her. She was her own person once more. The second thing she did was sign the Giving Pledge. The Giving Pledge, an initiative created by Warren Buffett and Bill and Melinda Gates in 2010, is a formal commitment by the planet's wealthiest individuals to give away the majority of their vast fortunes. Jeff Bezos, despite being one of the richest men ever, has never signed it. MacKenzie added her name to the pledge within a few weeks of finalizing her divorce. Her public statement was characteristically modest. "I have a disproportionate amount of money to share." Then she made a solemn promise. She vowed to keep giving until the safe is empty. She was not exaggerating. In 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic absolutely devastated the global economy. Food banks were completely overwhelmed by demand. Non-profit organizations struggled just to survive. MacKenzie responded by donating $5.8 billion in a single year, which is one of the largest single-year philanthropic distributions by any single individual in all of recorded history. And astonishingly, she was only just getting started. By December of 2025, MacKenzie Scott had already given away $26.3 billion to more than 2,700 organizations in just 6 years. That figure is worth repeating. $26.3 billion, which is more than she even received in her divorce settlement. She has literally donated more money than she actually got. And here is the truly remarkable part. Despite giving away $26.3 billion, her personal net worth has barely decreased because Amazon's stock has nearly doubled in value since her divorce. The shares that she held onto have appreciated faster than she is able to give the resulting money away. She is actively attempting to empty her safe, and yet the safe just keeps refilling itself with more wealth. But it is not just the enormous sum that makes MacKenzie Scott so extraordinary. It is the way she gives. Traditional philanthropy can often feel demeaning to recipients. Nonprofits typically have to apply for grants, write exhaustive proposals, and meet with various program officers, all before filing detailed reports and usually putting the donor's name on a new building. The entire system often revolves around the personal preferences of the wealthy individual, not the true needs of the organizations doing the vital work. MacKenzie Scott rejected all of that. She provides unrestricted funds. No applications are ever required. No extensive reports are demanded. Organizations can utilize the money in whatever way they believe is best. She never requires them to name anything in her honor. She does not dictate how the financial support should be spent. She identifies organizations that are doing excellent work, verifies that they are indeed legitimate, and then completely without any prior warning deposits millions of dollars directly into their accounts. Many recipients have described getting phone calls entirely out of the blue, telling them they have just been gifted $10 million or $20 million or even $50 million with absolutely no strings attached. The head of the United Negro College Fund called her Saint Mackenzie after she donated $560 million to HBCUs in one single round of giving. In total, she has now contributed over $1.35 billion to historically black colleges and universities. Planned Parenthood was the recipient of $275 million. Food banks all across America have received hundreds of millions more. Her contributions total in the millions, benefiting a wide spectrum of causes, including LGBTQ plus organizations, nonprofits, fighting for racial justice, environmental groups, affordable housing initiatives, and charities dedicated to assisting immigrants and refugees. She champions causes that many other billionaires actively avoid and directs her funds to organizations that have historically been neglected and underfunded. Her focus remains squarely on supporting those in the most dire need. In fact, a comprehensive 3-year analysis of her philanthropic efforts revealed that an overwhelming 93% of nonprofit leaders confirmed her grants substantially boosted their capacity to serve their communities effectively. Yet throughout this entire monumental endeavor, MacKenzie Scott has maintained a profile so low she is practically invisible. You won't find her giving interviews or delivering speeches. She avoids galas, never seeks public credit, and has deliberately chosen not to establish a foundation bearing her name, all while operating with a remarkably small team. Her method is astonishingly direct. She simply distributes billions of dollars among thousands of different organizations, a process which has transformed an immeasurable number of lives, and yet her public statements on the matter are exceptionally rare and always concise. On the infrequent occasions she does communicate publicly, her purpose is to shift the spotlight away from herself and onto the individuals performing the hands-on work, stating, "I want to de-emphasize privileged voices and cede focus to others." She believes that the people actively fighting against injustice are the ones who truly deserve to be at the heart of the narratives about the change they are bringing about. And this is the point where the story takes a critical turn. While MacKenzie was quietly redistributing billions, what was Jeff's focus? Allow me to illustrate the stark difference between them. I can assure you the reality is even more jarring than you might imagine. As MacKenzie was silently revolutionizing the landscape of American philanthropy, Jeff Bezos was capturing public attention for entirely different and far more conspicuous reasons. Back in 2021, he officially resigned from his role as the CEO of Amazon, announcing his intention to dedicate his time to a variety of other interests. These new priorities included his aerospace company, Blue Origin, his ownership of the Washington Post newspaper, and most notably, his personal life. And that personal life had a new center of gravity, Lauren Sanchez. Once their respective divorces were finalized, Jeff and Lauren made their relationship public in a big way. They were constantly photographed on lavish yachts, mingling at celebrity-filled parties, and becoming mainstays on red carpets. Following years of MacKenzie's preference for privacy, Jeff embraced dating under the full glare of the media spotlight. The difference in their public personas was so profound it was impossible to ignore. Jeff acquired a staggering $500 million yacht, a vessel so immense it ranks as one of the largest sailing ships ever constructed. So colossal, in fact, that a historic bridge in the Netherlands needed to be temporarily taken apart just to allow it passage. He also purchased a Beverly Hills mansion for $175 million, a sale that shattered records as one of the priciest residential transactions in California's history. His portfolio of assets includes several private jets and an array of homes in exclusive locations like Seattle, Washington, D.C., New York, Maui, and Miami. Then, in May of 2023, he proposed to Lauren Sanchez, presenting her with an engagement ring of truly enormous proportions. The pair publicly celebrated their engagement, ensuring they were photographed amidst all the visible symbols of their extraordinary wealth. Their wedding, held in June of 2025, was less a private ceremony and more a grand spectacle meticulously engineered for maximum media attention. The chosen location was Venice, Italy, where it seemed as though the entire city had been commandeered for the event, with fleets of private water taxis shuttling guests along the famous canals. Ancient historic palazzos were repurposed as exclusive venues for the lavish parties, which spanned a full 3 days of continuous celebration. The estimated price tag for the affair hovered around $50 million, and the guest list was a who's who of Hollywood, featuring 200 high-profile celebrities. Attendees included Oprah Winfrey, Kim Kardashian, Leonardo DiCaprio, Bill Gates, and even Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner. Throughout the 3-day extravaganza, Lauren Sanchez was seen in 27 different designer outfits. To accommodate these guests, a fleet of 27 private jets arrived from various locations across the globe. Meanwhile, just outside the opulent festivities, protesters congregated with signs that read, "If you can rent Venice for your wedding, you can pay more tax." This juxtaposition of the extravagant celebration within and the palpable anger without was incredibly stark, and social media platforms erupted with furious comparisons. While Jeff was spending $50 million on a single wedding party, MacKenzie was donating billions to food banks. While Jeff's new bride showcased an endless parade of designer gowns, MacKenzie was quietly writing checks to support homeless shelters. And while Jeff's celebrity guests were being chauffeured through the canals of Venice, MacKenzie's contributions were funding the construction of affordable housing. As images from the extravagant Venice wedding flooded the internet, actress Mia Farrow posted a simple question: how awesome is MacKenzie Scott? Numerous other celebrities echoed her sentiment, and the public's judgment was unambiguous. The media attention was focused on the wrong Bezos. Yet one specific detail about the wedding was especially revealing. Before the ceremony took place, Jeff and Lauren had both signed a legally airtight prenuptial agreement. According to reports, this agreement guarantees Lauren a sum of approximately $60 million in the event the marriage dissolves. $60 million. This figure represents what Jeff Bezos values the relationship at. It is the financial cap on his commitment. It appears he learned a singular lesson from his first divorce. That divorce cost him a staggering $38 billion, and the lesson he apparently took from it was to shield his fortune rather than to protect his marriage. Now, 6 years after those scandalous text messages were first published, the divergence between the paths of Jeff Bezos and MacKenzie Scott could not be more dramatic. Let's examine their philanthropic records. Jeff Bezos, whose personal fortune surpasses $200 billion, has donated approximately $4 billion over the course of his entire lifetime. That might sound like a substantial sum, but it crumbles under scrutiny. The math shows it's less than 2% of his total net worth. In stark contrast, MacKenzie Scott, who possesses only a fraction of his wealth, has already given away $26 billion, a figure that represents more than 70% of her entire divorce settlement. She has actually donated more than the initial amount she received. He, on the other hand, has contributed what amounts to a statistically tiny fraction of his fortune. Now let's consider their promises. When Warren Buffett and Bill Gates launched the Giving Pledge, which invites billionaires to commit the majority of their wealth to charity, MacKenzie Scott signed on without hesitation. She made that promise, and she has unequivocally kept it. To this day, Jeff Bezos has refused to put his name on the line. The second wealthiest man on the globe will not pledge to donate the majority of his fortune. The headlines tell the entire story. When MacKenzie's name appears in the news, it is for channeling hundreds of millions to food pantries, historically black colleges and universities, or non-profits focused on affordable housing. These organizations hail her as a savior. Media outlets have labeled her the most generous philanthropist of our time. When Jeff generates headlines, it is for his $500 million super yacht or his $175 million mansion. It's for his $50 million wedding, where his new bride sported 27 different looks. One is trying to give away her fortune, the other is trying to furnish his yacht. And you need only look at public commentary to see the comparison. During Jeff's opulent Venice wedding, while celebrities toasted the couple inside social media, was toasting MacKenzie instead. How unbelievably awesome is MacKenzie Scott, was the sentiment posted by Mia Farrow. Commentators everywhere noted the staggering contrast. The court of public opinion had already reached its decision. The wife who suffered the betrayal is now held in higher esteem than the husband who betrayed her. The woman who settled for less than she was due is now celebrated for giving far more than anyone anticipated. The woman who maintained a dignified silence about her ex-husband's moral lapses now speaks with more volume through her actions than any resentful interview possibly could. That is the final scorecard. That is what you call karma, and the outcome is not even remotely close. So, what does this entire saga truly demonstrate? For some, hearing about the Bezos divorce immediately brings to mind $38 billion. They believe that's the penalty for infidelity, the sum Jeff was forced to pay. But that depiction isn't entirely accurate, is it? Jeff Bezos' fortune still exceeds $200 billion. He keeps his yacht, his opulent mansions, his private jets, and his space exploration venture. He went on to marry the woman from the affair in a $50 million ceremony. By any purely financial metric, he came out just fine. The authentic price he paid cannot be calculated in currency. It is gauged by what comes to people's minds when his name is mentioned. Before 2019, Jeff Bezos was celebrated as the genius who founded Amazon. He was the visionary who completely reshaped global retail, the entrepreneur who built a trillion-dollar empire from a garage. Now, his legacy also includes being the man who deceived the wife, who drove their car on that initial journey. He is the billionaire who betrayed a quarter-century of devotion, the man whose ex-wife donates more money than he does, while he is busy acquiring another massive boat. That new reputation will shadow him indefinitely. No amount of wealth can ever buy back his old one. And as for MacKenzie, she could have resigned herself to a life defined as the woman Jeff Bezos wronged, forever cast as the victim, the wife who was cast aside. Instead, she made a deliberate choice. She decided that her identity would not be shaped by what was done to her, but by what she did in response. $26 billion has gone to people who desperately needed it. Thousands of organizations have been transformed, and millions of lives have been altered. She has built a legacy not on what was stripped away from her, but on the immense fortune she has given away. This is not about getting even. It's something far more powerful. It is irrefutable proof that the most constructive reaction to betrayal is not bitterness. It is about becoming the kind of person the individual who wounded you could never be. Jeff Bezos made a definitive choice in 2018. He chose Lauren Sanchez over MacKenzie. He opted for an 8-month affair over a 25-year partnership. He prioritized his own desires over his family. MacKenzie selected a different course. She chose dignity over retribution and generosity over resentment. She chose to become someone the man who was unfaithful to her could never aspire to be. 2 choices, 2 separate paths, and 2 vastly different conclusions. Here is how their tale ends. In 1994, a young woman sat in the driver's seat of a car watching her husband compose a business plan as she navigated them across America into a deeply uncertain future. She placed her faith in him when nobody else would. She was there packing boxes in a garage when they possessed nothing, balancing their books and shipping out orders, and she put her own aspirations on hold so his could come to fruition. And for the following 25 years, she remained by his side as he rose to become the wealthiest person in the history of the world. Her reward for this unwavering loyalty included secret hotel rendezvous and a stream of illicit text messages to another woman. It was an 8-month-long affair conducted behind her back with a television anchor introduced to her husband, ironically by that woman's own husband. When the intimate texts were leaked and the scandal erupted into the public sphere, when her personal humiliation was put on display as a public spectacle, MacKenzie Scott could have chosen the path of revenge. She possessed every right and every legal tool to take half of everything, and could have spent her remaining years reminding the world of what Jeff Bezos did to her. She did not. On the contrary, she accepted less than she was entitled to, expressed gratitude for their past, when she had every justification to be bitter, reclaimed her surname Scott, and then embarked on something truly astounding. She started giving it all away. This wasn't done to spite Jeff, to prove a point, or for publicity and praise. She gave with the conviction that she held a disproportionate amount of wealth that other people needed far more. $26.3 billion spread across more than 2,700 organizations. Funds went to historically black colleges and universities, food banks, homeless shelters, climate action groups, and organizations dedicated to racial justice. Billions upon billions of dollars flowed to people who had never dreamed of such assistance, with no strings attached, from a woman who never once sought the credit for her actions. Jeff Bezos, in stark contrast, orchestrated a $50 million wedding in Venice, acquired a $500 million super yacht, and stepped away from the helm of his company. He relocated to Miami for tax advantages and became renowned for nearly everything but his generosity. It seems he absorbed only a single lesson from his divorce. Insist that Lauren Sanchez signed a prenuptial agreement. The more profound lessons about fidelity, about integrity, and about what is truly valuable in life, those apparently did not register. The entire world observed them both. The public compared them, and ultimately the world sided with MacKenzie. Whenever Jeff makes news for his staggering wealth, commentators are quick to highlight how little he has donated compared to the woman he was unfaithful to. When people reflect on the Bezos divorce, they do not recall Jeff's business triumphs. They recall MacKenzie's profound grace. That is the essence of karma, not some form of supernatural retribution. It represents something far simpler, something fundamentally more human. When you are disloyal to someone who gave their all for you, you lose a part of yourself that money can never recover. When you navigate personal devastation with dignity, you cultivate a strength that news headlines can never undermine. MacKenzie Scott once drove a car across the United States so her then-husband could establish a business. 30 years later, she is driving billions of dollars to the people who desperately need it. Jeff Bezos succeeded in building the everything store. It appears he forgot that everything also includes one's character. The woman he cast aside grew into the person he could never hope to be. That is the true account of Jeff Bezos' $38 billion error in judgment. So, what became of everyone else involved? Michael Sanchez, the brother who leaked his sister's private affairs for $200,000, remains alienated from Lauren. He was not on the guest list for the Venice wedding. He will not be present at any future family gatherings. He bartered his relationship with his own sister for a check from a tabloid. A terrible bargain. The inquiry into Saudi Arabia's involvement was never fully resolved. The FBI was unable to substantiate any of the claims. Some enigmas are just not meant to be solved. David Pecker and the National Enquirer were never formally indicted for extortion. The tabloid was later sold to new ownership. They simply walked away from the scandal. Lauren Sanchez is now formally Lauren Sanchez Bezos. She got her billionaire, celebrated her Venetian wedding, and secured her rock-solid prenup, which guarantees $60 million if things do not work out. Time alone will determine if that prenuptial agreement is ever invoked. And as for MacKenzie Scott, she continues to give. As of December 2025, her charitable contributions have reached a total of $26.3 billion. She has vowed to continue giving until her entire fortune is gone. At the pace she is currently going, that pledge might just become a reality. She refuses to give interviews, does not court attention, and avoids speaking about her ex-husband. She simply carries on writing checks to food pantries, schools, affordable housing organizations, and community health clinics. Quietly, persistently, and with extraordinary generosity, the woman Jeff Bezos wronged has become one of the most celebrated individuals in America. And that is the essence of the story. If you believe that karma is a genuine force, please hit that subscribe button. Tell me down in the comments whose story you think I should delve into next. What particular scandal deserves a complete and thorough investigation? What act of betrayal holds a lesson that the world urgently needs to understand? And if this account reminded you that decent people do sometimes triumph, share it with someone who could use that message today. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you again in the next installment. 1.